The Prime Minister is in Rome this morning after a visit to Jakarta, riding high and meeting world leaders. While back here, the Liberals and Nationals argue over which way to turn and whether to remain in coalition after their election defeat. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. In the space of 1 week, 3 parties settled their leadership. The Greens, under Larissa Waters, are set to return to a stronger focus on climate change and the environment. The Liberals, under Sussan Ley, are promising a more modern agenda. The Nationals, sticking with David Littleproud, are talking up their increased clout within the coalition. But leadership decisions are only a first step. The Liberals and Nationals still haven't reached a coalition agreement. Internal debates are raging over nuclear power and the net zero emissions target. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, shifted his focus to the international stage after his new-look ministry was sworn in.
The Prime Minister has revealed a major overhaul of his cabinet.
The Honourable Annika Wells MP as Minister.
I told you.
I'll try that again. Get your brother to kick the ball down that way. Beautiful.
Dumped Labor Minister Ed Dziedzic. He's branded the Deputy Prime Minister a factional assassin.
Welcome to your first ministry meeting of this term, the 48th Parliament.
This is what happens when you've got more good people than you have spots in the ministry.
I just don't think we should have had this distraction.
Yeah, I'd be unhappy too if I was Ed and if I was Mark.
It is an incredible honour to be elected as a Member of Parliament, but it's an even greater honour to serve in the executive of a Labor government.
Back-to-back leadership battles in Canberra.
The leadership at this stage we know will be between David Littleproud and Matt Canavan.
Okay, thanks everyone. David Littleproud has been elected as leader of the National Party.
It's a great honour to lead our great party.
The Liberal Party is set to elect a new leader later this morning.
Sussan Ley could become the first woman to lead the Liberals.
Our job is just simply to give you the results. The new leader of our Liberal Party is Sussan Ley, with 29 votes, and Angus Taylor, 25.
I am humbled, I am honoured, and I am up for the job.
A defeated Angus Taylor slipping out the back door.
Happy with the result?
Australia spoke very clearly to the Liberal Party. We've listened, we've acted.
New beginning.
Was it worth a switch, Senator Price?
Making comments in due course.
I absolutely respect the outcome of what the party room decided.
Net zero, is it settled or not?
There are different views about how we appropriately reduce emissions.
Net zero is the bare minimum. Net zero is just, by 2050, is not a policy, it's the bare minimum framework.
No policies have been adopted or walked away from at this time.
Larissa Waters has been chosen as the new federal leader of the Greens.
People elected us to get shit done.
Selamat pagi. It is wonderful to be back here in Indonesia.
Kami akan mengejar realisasi berbagai komitmen yang telah disepakati bersama.
No relationship is more important to Australia than this one.
And my guest this morning is Liberal Senator Anne Ruston, who's been the party's shadow health minister for the past 3 years. First, let's check what's making news. And Sussan Ley has paid tribute to her mother, who died early yesterday, just days after watching her daughter become the first woman to lead the Liberal Party. Ms Ley has told News Corp papers her mum was a trailblazer. She's also spoken about the huge task the party faces in winning back the trust of women. And in the 9 newspapers, Matthew Knott has spoken to the European Union ambassador, who's talking up the prospects of a free trade deal being struck with Australia by the end of the year. The Prime Minister will meet European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Rome tomorrow after attending the Pope's inaugural Mass. And the ABC's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Dziedzic is in Rome, and I spoke to him a short time ago. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Look, first on the trade front, Australia and the EU couldn't reach a free trade deal a couple of years ago. What's changed now?
Well, David, in 2 words, Donald Trump. That's pretty much the only thing that has changed. Australia and the EU's positions are pretty similar to what they were a couple of years ago, but now with Donald Trump in the White House, upending global trade as we know it, countries like Australia, blocs like the EU have many good reasons to try and do what they can, not just to bolster free trade, but also to do more deals, to find alternative markets to the United States. So in an increasingly perilous and uncertain and fragmented world, it just makes much more sense for Australia and the EU to find a compromise on some of those knotty issues that they couldn't get over last time and reach a deal which both parties can be happy with. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he was asked about this earlier today, David, and he sounded cautiously hopeful that a deal could be reached. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We're up for a deal with the European Union. We support free and fair trade. We're up for a deal, but not any deal at any price.
So, Stephen, who else will the Prime Minister be meeting while he's there in Rome?
Well, the Prime Minister's also going to meet with Ursula von der Leyen, the EU chief, and is also likely to meet with a few other world leaders while he's here, including Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney. Perhaps the most attention, though, will be on Ukraine's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, who Mr Albanese is expected to meet at some point in the next couple of days, even if the details haven't been ironed out yet. Of course, this comes in the wake, David, of those peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, and also the 13-year sentence that was handed to Oscar Jenkins by Russia, a sentence that Anthony Albanese has slammed as appalling and a disgrace. Now, I think it's likely the two men will discuss how they might work together to try and secure his release, potentially through a prisoner swap deal, but that task is likely to be complicated and painstaking.
And Stephen, the whole reason the Prime Minister is there in Rome is, of course, to attend Pope Leo's inaugural Mass. And I suppose this is a personal highlight for Anthony Albanese too.
Yeah, that's right, David. Anthony Albanese doesn't often talk much about his faith. He was asked about it today and he said it was a personal matter. So he didn't want to talk, for example, about what he prayed about. He wants to keep his personal faith separate from his public role as Prime Minister. But this is still a big moment for Mr Albanese, who was, of course, raised Catholic. He met today with senior Catholic leaders here in Rome, and he talked about the significance of the papal Mass that we're going to see just in the coming hours, not just for Catholics around the world, but also for the 5 million or so Catholics in Australia who will no doubt be glad to see Mr Albanese here in Rome.
Indeed. Well, it's been a busy time there in Rome. Stephen Dziedzic, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to start our panel conversation this morning with the coalition, which technically isn't a coalition just yet. Sussan Ley and David Littleproud are still negotiating the terms of a new agreement. There are debates over nuclear, net zero, the $20 billion Regional Australia Fund promised during the campaign, and, of course, how many frontbench positions the Nationals should hold. Now, neither leader can afford to come away looking like they've given too much ground to the other. It is an early test for both in what's going to be a difficult term ahead. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined by Niki Savva, Paul Sakkal and Anna Henderson. Welcome to you all. And Paul, congrats on your new role at the Nine Papers as well. Niki, first I should say our condolences to Sussan Ley and her family. What a few days she has had. The loss of her mother, though, and we've heard her reflections on that. Her mum did get to see her elected as the first woman to lead the Liberal Party. Why, just coming to that decision of the party earlier in the week, why did they opt for Sussan Ley over Angus Taylor?
Well, I thought that she was the obvious choice for the Liberal Party now. If they had gone for a man and for Angus Taylor after everything that had happened in the campaign, I think many Liberals would have walked away from the party. And certainly there were MPs inside the Liberal Party who were saying that if she wasn't elected, they would sit outside the party room. They thought she was the best candidate and it was time for a woman to become leader. And also she had, although everybody carried responsibility for what happened during the campaign, there was a feeling that she carried much less responsibility for what happened than did, say, Angus Taylor.
So hang on, just to pick up what you said, there are some who were threatening to sit on the crossbench if Sussan Ley didn't become leader.
There were both women and some men,
right?
Because there was a fair bit of antagonism towards Angus Taylor. They were blaming him fairly extensively for the lack of an economic narrative, for the fact that he wasn't able to land a blow on the government over its management of the economy, and quite simply, there were no economic policies. Now, that might not have been entirely his fault, because everything really flows from the leader during a campaign, but he was still wearing a lot of the responsibility for that.
They both share some responsibility, Paul, don't they, along with Peter Dutton. I mean, one was the deputy leader, one was the shadow treasurer. They can't all wash their hands of what happened here. The vote itself, though, was tight, 29-25, and it's worth noting the numbers could change once the Senate changes in July.
Yeah, there's been a bit of chatter around the place that Angus Taylor's camp might seek a recount at some point, because Giselle Kaptarian, the potential member for Bradfield, might not win that seat, and there's two senators, being Holly Hughes and Linda Reynolds, whose terms will expire in a month, who voted for Sussan Ley. I don't think that's going to occur. Angus Taylor has no intention of taking the leadership under such circumstances. So Sussan Ley will have a period of unity to the extent that she can bring the party together. But there's going to be huge focus internally on whether she rewards only her backers, being the New South Wales moderates and Alex Hawke, centre-right. There's hyper-factionalism in the New South Wales division. Alex Hawke, Andrew Bragg, Angus Taylor, the first two of which backed Sussan Ley. Lots of power games between that trio. If Angus Taylor was to have won, I hadn't heard what you've just put, Niki, about people sitting on the crossbench, but something that would have been very likely is that if Angus Taylor was the leader, the New South Wales hyper-factionalism would have led to immediate knives out for Angus Taylor. There would have been some members who would have had no role on the front bench, and he would have faced a really tricky time. So I wonder if it's almost better for the party that Sussan Ley, who's a bit of a consensus candidate, doesn't have as much baggage, has the role for now.
Well, yeah, who she appoints to the front bench is the first test, and she said she'll, appoint those who supported her and those who didn't, that it will reach across the aisle to that degree. She's treading carefully, though, I think it's fair to say, very carefully on policy and where they went wrong at the election as well. No captain's calls, doesn't want to get ahead of the party room, and, when it comes to what were the problems at the election, here's what she said.
I don't want to say there was a particular 1, 2 or 3 reasons. But when I say that we have to meet modern Australia where they are, I think that gives some sense of the listening that we need to do. And we do need to hear what people say, and we do need to act on what we hear.
And Anna, she keeps referring to this modern Australia that they want to represent, a more modern party. What does that mean in practice, do you think?
Well, they're going to meet people where they are.
Yes,
I'm looking forward to finding out a lot more detail about what happens from that listening, but I think we're at the very early embryonic stages of whatever is to come from here. But you can't have a party leave behind all of its core business as well. So whatever they bring forward as a Liberal Party, there will still be a lot of pressure to keep some of those core values, which in some ways were kind of disbanded in the election campaign by Peter Dutton, by some of his policies. It'll be about, looking at in a far more progressive way, I think, about issues relating to women. I'll be so interested to hear what Anne Ruston has to say on that front. And also about, championing women, hopefully in seats where they can be potentially competitive at the next election. Will they get to the point of quotas? We don't know. But, back to the idea of whether Sussan Ley's leadership is safe for the moment, even though the margin was really tight, I don't think there are many within the Liberal Party right now who think it would be optically a good idea for them long term to cut down the first woman to lead the party in 80 years.
I think that's right. To give her 5 minutes and then replace her is going to be a terrible look.
But she's under heaps of pressure to deliver. And if she missteps, the consequences will be dramatic.
And things are going to get more difficult from here. I mean, the leadership sorting that out was arguably difficult, but when they get into these policy decisions, it's going to become more difficult because that's where the tensions will show. Niki, would it be a modern party representing a modern Australia to dump the net zero target?
Well, you wouldn't think so, but I think people are reasonably confident that that target will be kept. The question will be how to get there. And, you know, that all goes to renewables and what they do about nuclear. And the Nats are absolutely insistent that they stick to the nuclear policy. And there are Libs who are saying, you know, generally, yep, that's not a bad idea, but it can't be the same nuclear policy that there was that they took to the election.
The big 7 government, taxpayer-funded nuclear plants.
All of that. And the most likely compromise at this stage is that they will agree to remove the prohibition on nuclear and then leave it to private enterprise.
But here's the thing, Paul, that doesn't get you to net zero, not that I can see anyway. You remove the ban and hope that someone in the private sector one day builds 1 or 2 or more nuclear plants.
But nor would the other policy, because the plants would never be built in time and they never were going to be anyway, and the cost would be prohibitive. So that's why I say the real issue is how to get there, how to get to net
And
zero.
they're probably not going to be in government for at least 2 terms. So it's almost fanciful to even talk about when they would build nuclear plants, because there's no election coming up that they might foreseeably win. I think on the nuclear policy, it's worth thinking about it in a historical context. The nuclear policy was, in large part, a patch-up job to heal division inside the party and get the Nats on board to net zero. If you go back to Howard, every Liberal leader has had huge problems uniting the party on energy policy. Only the leaders with ascendancy and authority internally have managed to bridge that gap. Peter Dutton was able to do it with the nuclear policy. Morrison used his authority to get a deal on net zero. Turnbull was killed over it. Brendan Nelson, Malcolm Turnbull in the last opposition era were killed on it. So this is another this will probably be the defining test for Sussan Ley. Can she keep the coalition together on energy policy?
Well, the history is important, right? Scott Morrison was the one who signed Australia up to net zero in the Paris Agreement. There was the deal with the Nats. Peter Dutton stuck with it. He wasn't budging on net zero. Now it's up for review. I did speak to Innes Willix from the Australian Industry Group for the podcast this week. Just for an industry perspective on reopening this debate, I asked him whether Australia does need another debate about net zero.
Oh, God, no, anything but, please. We've been there before many times over the past 20 years or so, and to reopen the climate wars, as you aptly described them, is like reopening an old wound.
Tell us what you really think. There's far more points that he makes there, and the QR codes there if you want to listen to the whole thing. But yeah, industry, they've made investment decisions on this. They don't want this walked away from or debated once again. But Anna, is this the main sticking point now between the Libs and the Nats?
It is a really critical sticking point for sure, and it's the one that I think in a way by David Littleproud, my understanding is getting pretty strong numbers for his leadership to continue over Matt Canavan. Like, he does have some authority internally, he feels, to try and find the middle ground, but the Nats really want to keep nuclear in this conversation. I think the wording of what eventually happens if we have a coalition agreement, I can't believe we're saying if we have a coalition agreement in some ways, but that's, it's on the table. Though I'm hearing very much the Nationals that, they want to be coalitionists. They just want to get a good deal.
Yeah, and look, it is worth reminding everyone that the Nats had a federal council only about 18 months ago where net zero, a motion was put up. I think Barnaby Joyce was one of those supporting the motion to walk away from net zero, and that was defeated quite strongly, in fact. So the party itself, the Nats party itself, stuck with net zero at that time. Now, yes, things have changed, like Donald Trump and so on since then. Whether we do see the coalition split though, Niki, how likely is it really? And what are some of the pros and cons?
Well, they're saying, both sides are saying it's entirely possible. It isn't just nuclear and net zero that's the sticking point. There are also the number of frontbench positions. And I'm told that the Nationals are seeking 5, 7, and the Libs are saying no, 5. And Bridget McKenzie is also saying, you know, we want a greater say in economic policy. And the Libs are saying, oh yeah, forget that. The last time we did that was with Barnaby Joyce on finance, so we're not going through that again. So, I mean, there are a lot of issues that need to be sorted between them. And although people say there is goodwill, there is also a realisation that they might not be able to sort these things out. And both sides, there are people on both sides who say they're prepared to have a trial separation.
And one of the main sticking points, and an obvious one, is that the Liberals were decimated in the urban seats, right, in the big cities. But the Nats really don't have much interest in adopting policy positions to win back the big cities. I mean, you mentioned Bridget McKenzie. Here's what she had to say about it.
It is to be unrelenting in standing up for the interests of the 9 million Australians who don't live in capital cities. We do that, we do it unapologetically, and we do it with the national interest in mind, and that's going to continue.
That's contradictory to what David Littleproud said repeatedly in party room meetings last term, which caused him consternation internally. He would go into party room meetings and say, one of our key roles, and my key role as leader, is to not drag back the Liberal Party in the cities. He said we cannot be a contentious arm of the coalition that stops the Liberal Party winning metropolitan seats.
Because they're not going to get back to government.
They're not going to get back to government.
Where most people live.
They hold 10 of the 80 urban electorates now. Labor holds 70. Sorry, Labor holds 70, the coalition holds some other amount. There's Teals in the mix as well. Yeah. But 10 of the 80 are coalition held. It's extraordinary. On the numbers on how many shadow cabinet positions they want, for all the Nats chest beating about their newfound authority because the proportions have changed with Liberals losing their seats, they're actually entitled on the formula to fewer frontbench positions than they held last term. They were entitled to 5 last term. They got 1 in the net zero deal, up to 6, and then they gave Jacinta Price a free spot. Effectively, that was Peter Dutton's course. They had 7. On the current numbers, they're entitled to 6. So the Nats want an economic portfolio and a 7th spot, but the numbers dictate that they only deserve 6.
Sounds a bit like the New South Wales right faction in the Labor Party, which we'll come to, had too many frontbench spots and had to give one up. On Jacinta Price, where is she left after this? She, of course, jumped from the Nats to the Libs party room, much to the consternation of her former Nats colleagues and some Libs. Does she get a big role under Sussan Ley or not?
I mean, Sussan Ley said in that first press conference, you know, that Jacinta Price was under consideration. She's left that door open for potentially having a role on the front bench. But will they even have the Department of Government Efficiency going forward? What the role that she had?
I can't imagine they would.
I would imagine that might be what they hear from people when they are out there listening.
It sounded too Trumpy.
But in terms of what she does do, there is also the acknowledgement that she's got a big profile. That she's charismatic and she's a performer for the Liberal Party and for the National Party. So I think there is a sense of trying to find
section.
her.
Oh, a certain section. This is the problem with Jacinta Price, that even the Nats were saying yesterday, there are a few of them who are actually saying good luck to the Libs on how to handle this whole Jacinta Price thing, because while she does appeal to the base, she doesn't appeal to the wider electorate. I mean, she's a polarising figure, so...
what they're grappling with.
She lost a lot of friends on the leadership ballot day because she didn't tell anybody that if Angus Taylor didn't win the first ballot, she would then not run for deputy. When the deputy ballot came out, Ted O'Brien quickly put his hand up. Jacinta Price looked around to the guys in the right faction who sit up the back, Andrew Hastie and Phil Thompson and others, and they looked at her and they were like, are you going to stand up? You're our candidate. And she shook her head and they were like, what's going on? So Phil Thompson stands up, she walks out of the room, doesn't really explain her decision, rocks up on Sky a few hours later, the same channel where she launched her candidacy a week before and didn't speak to any other media, by the way, and says that there are, quote, lots of Australians who'd like to see me become the Prime Minister.
That's right, straight from the backbench to the Prime Ministership.
In the party that she's just joined.
I've never known that to happen before, except for Bob Hawke.
Deeply inflammatory. But also she thinks, and there are people in the party who think that she could play a productive role still. Whether Sussan Ley agrees with them,
we will see.
We will find out.
She'd be upsetting that base, though, were she not to look
Well,
after
she
it,
will
so.
get a role, but it depends on how big that role is.
She'll get a role, yeah.
And then how she performs in that role.
Time to talk to the Liberal Deputy Senate Leader, Anne Ruston, the party's health spokesperson for the past 3 years. And to take us there, here was some more advice from Innes Willicks to the Coalition on net zero.
Business has already made some investment decisions predicated on emissions reduction heading towards net zero by 2050. To reopen that now would put a lot of potential investment decisions on hold. Let's not back away and walk away from it. It would be putting business in a very difficult situation when it came to investing in our future.
Anne Ruston, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
So the advice and the view from industry is very clear. Stick with net zero. Are you listening to that feedback?
Well, look, David, we have to listen to feedback from absolutely everybody, and there's no question emissions reduction is an important part of policy going forward because, I mean, energy is the economy and we need to get energy policy right. But there's no secret there is a divergence of views in our party room about how we achieve that. But right now, I absolutely think the thing we need to concentrate on is making sure that people can afford their power bills, making sure that industry, as Innes points out, that they have the confidence in our energy policy in Australia so they continue to invest here. We don't want companies going broke like we've seen. We don't want companies offshoring like we've seen. So I think one of the most important issues is to get solid feedback and make sure that our energy policy is fit for purpose for modern Australia.
But this was a commitment, an international commitment to the Paris Agreement that the Morrison government made and that Peter Dutton stuck with. Why is it now being reviewed?
Well, look, David, I think the reality that we have to face as a political party, the Liberal Party, is that the electorate spoke very loudly to us 2 weekends ago that they didn't like what we were doing and we need to make some changes. And I think Sussan Ley is absolutely right in saying she's not going to prejudge, she's not going to make any captain's calls, she's going to look at absolutely everything because, to be quite frank, we have to build from the bottom up again because that election result was quite disastrous for the Liberal Party and we need to be open and honest with ourselves about what we need to take forward so that we are meeting Australia where they are and not talking about where we are.
Your new Liberal Senate colleague, Jacinta Price, has told The Australian that the net zero policy has definitely created the cost of living crisis. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I think right now the most important thing for us to do as the Liberal Party and as a coalition for that matter is to sit down and analyse every single contributing factor to our electoral loss. So it serves no purpose to say we're going to count this in today or that not in today. I think Susan's quite right in saying, nothing's been abandoned, nothing's been adopted. Let's actually look at everything because it's amazing when you actually get under the bonnet and pull the engine apart piece by piece, what you'll find out. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to do that because we owe it to Australia to actually be a strong opposition, to be a strong alternative government at the next election. And the only way we do that is if we rebuild from the grassroots.
You're obviously keeping a very open mind then. Senator Price, however, does seem to be making some judgments. She's also said it's impossible to get to net zero without nuclear. Should Senator Price be waiting for the outcome of these reviews?
Well, I think everybody in Australia expects us to go through a robust process. I mean, there was no doubt we lost the election in 22. We then lost an election in 25 with worse results than we saw in 22. So clearly we need to be doing something different. And I think, keeping an open mind, making sure that we're honest and open with that analysis of what went wrong and actually come out with a policy proposal and a modern Liberal Party, still maintaining all of the values that we hold so dear to the Liberal Party platform.
But should your colleagues be waiting for that process?
Well, I mean, I think everybody's entitled to their view and Senator Price, like every other colleague who makes comment either publicly or privately, those comments and those views should be considered. But I think we all need to play a constructive role in what it looks like into the future, and that's everybody, front bench, back bench, party members and the Australian public.
So if the net zero commitment from the Morrison era is now open for review, I'm just wondering what else is. Around the same time, the Morrison government signed Australia up to AUKUS. Is that under review?
Well, Susan made it very, very clear that we are going back to basics on everything, but I'm sure,
including
David,
AUKUS?
I'm sure, David, there will be many, many policy positions that we took to the last election that have been adopted unilaterally across our parties that will continue. But I think Susan's right in saying no captain's calls, and we did have a very bad result, David, and I think we owe it to ourselves, to our party, to our members and to Australia to make sure we look at everything. But as I said, there'll probably be many, many policies that we took to the last election that will remain exactly as they are.
Okay, but right now, is AUKUS under review for the coalition?
Well, look, as I said, I'm not going to rule in, rule out, but quite clearly that is a very, very important policy position that has been adopted by both sides of the parliament, in fact, both the Labor Party and the coalition, and I think it stands us in very strong stead in very uncertain times. But it's not for me to be ruling in, ruling out. The leaders made it very clear, but I think you can read from what I've just said that I think that we would consider AUKUS a very strong platform in our policy rebuild.
Some things are more likely to survive than others by the sounds of it. What about in the health portfolio, in which you've been the shadow minister? Your support for those bulk billing incentives and other measures that Labor announced during the election campaign, are they all now up in the air as well?
Well, look, obviously the first thing I want to see in the health policy area is that the Labor Party actually delivers on what it's promised, because Australians are doing it really tough when it comes to health. I mean, it's never been harder or more expensive to see a doctor. And so I really wish the Labor Party well in making sure that their policies are implemented so Australians can afford to go and see a doctor. I mean, the fact that 1.5 million Australians last year didn't go to see a doctor because they couldn't afford to do so, which means they're sicker, they're ending up in our emergency departments. I mean, it's a very, very bad story.
So you still support those measures?
Well, at this stage, as I said, I'm not ruling anything in, anything out, but I do absolutely want to see Australians getting affordable access to healthcare, something they haven't got at the moment and something I think is fundamental to a healthy Australia going forward.
Some of your Liberal colleagues and National colleagues want to change abortion laws in Australia. Your South Australian Senate colleague Alex Antic and the Nationals' Matt Canavan co-sponsored a bill in the last Parliament. Is that now under review as well, your position on abortion?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the issue of abortion is something that's well and truly in the domain of the states and territories, and it should stay there. But my understanding is that there is no proposal before to make any changes in relation to the small amount of responsibility that the federal parliament has for this issue.
Can you explain to viewers why Alex Antic was ahead of you on the Senate ticket in South Australia?
Well, obviously that's a decision for the party members here in South Australia. What I'm really excited about is now having been hopefully re-elected to the Parliament for another 6 years to play my role as part of the team, part of the leadership team, because I'm really excited about the opportunity to rebuild our party. I mean, of course, we were all devastated by the result, but it does provide us with an opportunity to rebuild and to actually focus on things that are important to Australians. And the reality is we need to make sure we're a strong alternative government by the time the next election comes around, so Australians have got a choice.
But we were talking earlier about the difficulty of trying to win back the sensible centre, as Sussan Ley calls it, the voters you've lost, and where your membership base is at. And it looks like the membership base in your state, South Australia, has been taken over by Conservatives.
Well, look, as I said, we're a broad church. I mean, that's where we work best, when we're tolerant of the broad sort of range of views that we have, but our values are all the same. I mean, I don't think anybody in my party doesn't believe that aspiration is the most important thing that we should strive to be able to enable every Australian to be able to achieve. And so I'm just to say, I'm very happy to be re-elected and looking forward to being part of the broader team nationally to rebuild our party in the interests of a party that reflects modern Australia.
The coalition agreement, well, it's still not an agreement at the moment. It's very much up in the air. Are there any red lines for you, any principles you won't walk away from just to keep a coalition agreement in place?
Well, I think we have to remember what the coalition agreement actually is. It is an agreement that is formal when we're in government to establish how executive government will operate between the two parties, and in opposition it's probably a less formal agreement, largely focused on frontbench positions and ratios, as you were just discussing with the panel earlier. And so I think we should maintain that coalition agreement as it's always been. I've never seen a coalition agreement there. There's something that is not made public, but I think
isn't that a bit weird? You're Deputy Senate Leader and you've never seen a coalition agreement.
Well, not at all. I mean, obviously it's an arrangement between the top of the Liberal Party and the top of the National Party, but it's about, my understanding is it's about things like frontbench positions and ratios and
so
the like.
leave policy matters like net zero and nuclear out of it.
Well, Liberal Party policy is developed in the Liberal Party room. National Party policy is delivered in the National Party room, and coalition policy is designed or is agreed to around the shadow cabinet table. So a coalition shadow cabinet will be the one that will put forward coalition policy, but we should never shy away from the fact that we've got two separate party rooms that go through policy processes separately.
Okay, but from what you're saying, these matters of nuclear and net zero shouldn't be in that coalition agreement. It should be for the shadow ministry and the shadow cabinet once you're in coalition to work out.
Look, absolutely, and I make no secret of the fact that I am a coalitionist. I think that we are strongest when we're in coalition with the National Party, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes of these constructive conversations that are going on at the moment between David Littleproud and Sussan Ley.
Do you think you will stay in coalition?
I certainly hope so, because as I said, I'm a coalitionist and I believe we're strongest when we are together.
Would you give them 7 spots, give the Nats 7 cabinet spots to make sure you do get that coalition you're hoping for?
Look, this is not a decision for me, but the one thing I know for sure is that Sussan has made it very clear that she's going to be ultra consultative in her process, and I think the one thing that will mark Sussan's reign is that she will be extraordinarily fair.
When it comes to working out what went wrong at the election, the worst ever result for the Liberal Party, I know you have suggested that the party could use artificial intelligence to help understand where it went wrong. Can you just explain that? What role would AI play in this process?
Well, very interestingly, last week after the election result, I just used some, off-the-shelf AI just to ask what AI thought about the Liberal Party in the election result. And there was I think probably...
What did it say?
Well, actually, more than anything, it showed me that there were so many different issues that Australians were considering when they went to the ballot box to vote, that I think it shows us that we absolutely have to look at everything, because there was no clear theme, apart from quite clearly the Australian public went to the ballot box and didn't vote for us. I think.
So what did AI tell you? Was it nuclear? Was it Peter Dutton? Was it the public service cuts? What did it suggest?
No, it didn't. There was no clear theme that came out of it, but it basically said that the product offering that we took to the Australian public, quite clearly Australians did not support, and we need to go back to the drawing board and have a look at all of the issues that factored into it. And I mean, many issues have been ventilated over the last 2 weeks by colleagues, by commentators, and every single one of them deserves the respect of being considered as part of a broader process.
Okay, but in this process that you go through, are you suggesting that you'll get more data, feed that into artificial intelligence, and then get some clearer answers?
Look, not at all. That was a line that I made the comment, I think on radio one day this week. There's many ways that we need to address this. Okay. We need to speak to our party members. We need to speak to the front bench and the back bench. We need to make sure the back bench is included in the process of going forward. We need to speak to the Australian public. But obviously technology gives us an opportunity to be able to collate the broader commentary across Australia. That's something that we probably haven't had access to before, and we should use that as well. Every tool that's available should be used.
In terms of winning back women, Labor will now have 51 women in the lower house. The Liberals will have 6, 7 at best. Your new leader, Sussan Ley, has previously suggested the Liberal Party consider quotas for a certain number of women to be in Parliament for the Liberal Party, and she nominated a quota of 40% at one stage. After this election defeat, are you now more open to the idea of quotas?
Well, look, I think we need to look at all options to make sure that we have got more women in the Parliament. Disappointingly, 28 fantastic women put their hand up to run for us at the last election and didn't get up. So one of the things that I'm really keen to do over the next 3 years, particularly, is to make sure each and every one of those 28 women are supported and encouraged so that they will put their hands up hopefully again in 3 years' time. At the same time, we've had a couple of fantastic new women are coming into the Parliament, making sure that they've got pathways within the Parliament to actually to rise to leadership positions in our party. But I think we have to look at everything, the pipelines of more women in our party structure, making sure that the pathway for women in our party to be able to get into our Parliament, and then making sure that when the women are in the Parliament that they have got a supported pathway so that they can take the leadership
and look
positions.
at quotas as well.
I'm saying nothing should be off the table.
Okay. And having your first woman leader in Sussan Ley, will that make a difference in terms of the policy offerings to win back women voters?
Look, I think our policy offerings need to reflect the feedback that we get more broadly across Australia. But look, we had 2 great candidates put their hands up for the leadership position this week, and I think both great, really good candidates. But Sussan won on Tuesday, and it's been great to see that all the colleagues have come out and said that they're absolutely 100% behind supporting Sussan going forward. She will bring her own unique style. I mean, she's somebody with an incredible depth of experience in various areas in her life. I mean, her life story is one you could write a book about. So I'm really looking forward to working with Sussan and the rest of the party room to make sure that we present the best possible Liberal Party going forward, a Liberal Party that actually, I think it's been said, meets Australia where they are, so that we're actually responding to what Australians want on the ground.
Did Angus Taylor offer you the deputy leadership to support him?
Look, I'm making no comment about anything that happened during that process. I absolutely believe in the confidentiality of our party room, and I would never breach any confidence. Don't read into that anything, whether it was a yes or a no. Right. I just never breach confidences.
Finally, will you be seeking or are you hoping for a new portfolio? Would foreign affairs perhaps be something for you, Anne Ruston?
Look, I will serve in whatever role the leader believes that my skills and experience are best suited to, but I just really am excited and looking forward to being part of a team going forward, and whatever role that I play in that, I'll be delighted to take on.
All right, Senator Anne Ruston, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Coming up, we'll also look at the Greens, who decided on a new leader in Larissa Waters during the week as well. First, let's just get back to the panel. Niki Savva, Sakkal and Anna Henderson. I'm sure you've been on ChatGPT while I was talking there, working out where the Liberals went wrong. What did you think of that?
According to ChatGPT, Peter Dutton is yet to contest a federal election. So it's out of date.
Right. Okay. It's a little bit out of date.
Not sure what AI...
worse than the polling.
No, well, exactly. But Niki, just listening to those positions there, everything is up for review. Clearly some things, though, are less up for review than others by the sounds of it, including things like AUKUS and even the health commitments made during the election. It sounded from Anne Ruston there that they're not about to walk away from those. But there have been some in the party, though, saying they back too many of these Labor spending measures.
Well, that's true. And, there was an internal tussle about the size of the deficit and whether they should be spending all this money or trying to counter it by putting a more credible, budget forward that showed a lower deficit. Well, of course, that never happened. But look, just listening to a lot of the Libs talking about what happened and what they should be doing, apart from meeting Australians wherever they are.
Where they're at.
Is, they keep talking about, we will stand up for our values and we will stand up for our philosophy. Nobody knows what they are anymore. Nobody knows what the Liberals stand for or what it is they actually intend to do.
Just on that point, I feel sorry for Liberals doing interviews at this point because the kind of rules of daily political media and rhetoric dictate that they can't use language that actually matches the extent of the crisis that they're in. They're in an existential crisis and the future of their party is up for debate as to whether they can be a viable party of government.
But isn't one of the problems that they've refused to acknowledge that? 2022 showed the extent of the problem that they faced and that it could be existential. And nobody talked about it. Everybody carried on as if nothing had happened.
Yeah, and I think some are talking with that level of strength. James, I thought the best idea and best comments on the record from a Liberal this week came from Senator James McGrath, who's a big thinker and doesn't do much media. He says that the party needs to do a special commission of inquiry into the future of the Liberal Party. Not a normal election review, not just into how their core flutes looked or what their policy was, but what is the raison d'etre of the party? Are its logistics up to scratch? The party's professionalism, back room, it's like comparing a top of the league AFL team with a great coaching unit, that's Labor, and a bottom of the league team that's at risk of getting relegated. They're not a professional party anymore. Their candidate selection is a problem. They don't use the digital tools that Labor does. Their branding looks old. James McGrath wants a root and branch look at the party that's not about blame shifting, because his view is that there's a chance that they go the way of the Conservative Party in Scotland and they just can't win elections anymore.
Well, let's move to Labor now, and it was Ed Husic on this program last week who didn't miss when he took aim at Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister, calling him a factional assassin after Ed and Mark Dreyfus were dumped from the front bench. Richard Marles broke his silence late in the week on Thursday. He was asked about the, his role in Ed Husic's demise.
Mr Marles, do you have Ed Husic's blood on your hands?
No, we have gone through obviously what is difficult processes in terms of choosing a ministry. It is a collective process.
Collective process. This was a collective process. He repeated that a few times. Has he been permanently damaged by this, do you think, Anna?
It is a big problem for Richard Marles now because this has become such a big story. It's gone international. Like a Labor reshuffle is being covered in different parts of the world, and Richard Marles and his role in it factionally has come under great scrutiny. And I think waiting so long to front the media as acting Prime Minister late in the week to then field those questions was probably maybe not the best approach if you want to just sort of cauterise the wound early on.
Yeah.
Ed Husic is not going to be silent in the caucus. He intends to be very vocal on issues that he cares about. He already is being that. And now there are these narratives, kind of competing narratives about whether this is Richard Marles and the right in Victoria that really engineered this, or whether this was actually him doing something that was something the Prime Minister was keen to see happen.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to that. Niki, where do you think this all leaves Richard Marles?
Putting it as politely as possible, and
as
there
you
are.
Do.
I do my best. There are people in the government, senior people, who say that Marles is completely knackered, except they don't say knackered, they use the F word.
Right.
And he did it to himself, and there will be retribution and there will be repercussions. I mean, there is just so much anger inside the government, especially the New South Wales right, about how this was handled and why it was done, why they couldn't wait. And the New South Wales right is well known for the way it treats people who cross them, and I don't think they will miss.
Long memories, but is too much of this being put on the shoulders of Richard Marles alone? I think it's interesting, Paul, to explore. Mark Dreyfus being dropped out was not about, one faction in New South Wales losing and Victorian right faction getting more. Mark Dreyfus is from the same Victorian right faction. He was dropped out for someone younger, Sam Ray, to come in, who's a factional ally of Richard Marles. But along the way, there has been this shift in responsibilities. Mark Dreyfus was the Attorney General who always fought having the Australian Federal Police and ASIO shifted back into Home Affairs. He's dumped, and suddenly the Australian Federal Police and ASIO is shifted back into Home Affairs. It now has protective services as well. It's a bigger portfolio, Home Affairs, than it ever was under Peter Dutton or Mike Pizzullo. It's the biggest it's ever been. What does this tell us about what also might have been going on behind the scenes with this movement?
Yeah, it's a good observation. Mark Dreyfus was from the Victorian right, but he was from a sub-faction within the Victorian right that was not Richard Marles's. He's associated with the group that was previously linked to Bill Shorten, which now has much less power and is overrepresented in the cabinet. So there was a numerical thing there, but there might have also been another factor at play, which was that Mark Dreyfus is philosophically opposed to the Home Affairs Department, has tried to disassemble it, wanted to disassemble it further. Tony Burke and the Prime Minister during the Dural caravan crisis, which ended up being a hoax. They didn't know that at the time. It was a communications breakdown. AFP was in Dreyfus's department, not sharing information with Burke and the Prime Minister. This caused fury at the top of the government, and Burke and the Prime Minister formed the view earlier this year, well before Mark Dreyfus was knifed after the election, that Home Affairs needed to be reconstituted, which is a contentious and big story because that is the view of Mike Pizzullo, Peter Dutton, Malcolm Turnbull that Labor has fought for so long.
And Tony Burke, as the Home Affairs Minister, is technically responsible for national security, and perhaps he's come to the realisation, I actually need to have AFP and ASIO back in Home Affairs to make this thing work. So look, it's just, there are many layers to what's gone on with all of that change. The Greens, they chose Larissa Waters by consensus as their new leader after Adam Bandt lost his seat, and the Queensland Senator is emphasising a focus on climate change and nature for the party.
We need strong action on the climate, on nature, on the housing crisis, on the cost of living crisis. We stand firm always on social justice and human rights, whether that's First Nations justice, whether that's a free Palestine, whether that's peace and human rights globally.
So, yes, they will still, they're not going to avoid those other issues like Gaza and social justice issues, but, you know, senior Green sources tell me that they are clearly putting more of a focus now on climate change and the environment. That's an understandable move, I suppose, Niki, and the first test will no doubt come over the environment laws that the new Environment Minister, Murray Watt, is hoping to push through this term.
Yeah, Mr. Fix-It. Well, look, the Greens did pay a heavy price, I think, for seeming too aggressive and too extremist on issues. So they might be sticking to the same policies, but they will present in a different way and approach in a different way. So I think that that they will probably do better under that kind of leadership from Larissa, and you would think that there would be more room for compromise to allow that.
Yeah, and Murray Watt's going to be in Perth over the coming days. He'll meet the Premier Roger Cook and the mining industry and get to work on, well, a couple of decisions. He's going to make a decision by the end of the month on extending the life of the North West Shelf gas project. But then these new environment laws that Tanya Plibersek came close to passing, he'll be putting pressure on both Larissa Waters and Sussan Ley, I think, to say, look, if you're really after the sensible centre, you've got to back these new environment laws. So there'll be some early tests all round on this one.
For sure. I think there have been some simplistic narratives that have come out of the Greens' loss. I'm not saying they're all wrong. I just think there's people have picked and chosen what they disliked about the Greens and said that is the reason for their demise. Their primary vote has barely changed across the country. It's pretty much the same. Went up a little. I think it's a little bit down on its record. Oh, maybe went up from last election, yeah. But it's almost near its record high. They lost badly in their own seats and a lot of people went to Labor. I think something that really changes about the Greens now that Adam Bandt and Max Chandler-Mather are gone, is that they lose their kind of economic radicalism. Bandt and Max were the two most minded to be very much to the left on economics and cost of living and housing. And turning the housing policy into a cost of living question early in the term was when they were getting cut through. They then shifted to Gaza and lost, that really diminished. I think without those two in the party room, they turn into an older form of Greens party that I'm not quite sure is fit for the times. So it's going to be very different Greens to deal with. And just on the question of a female leader, sorry for speaking for so long, Larissa Waters, Sussan Ley, two women in leadership roles, I think it might change the way the Prime Minister needs to treat them in a tonal sense. Changes the dynamic there.
There was even a comment about that from Sussan Ley, perhaps put to Sussan Ley in that press conference about her treatment by the Prime Minister, which she decided to sidestep in the moment. But what she said was still, I think, quite significant around the importance of resetting the relationship going forward. And Larissa Waters will be far more of an agent of compromise, I think. We'll probably see less of the stunts.
No big toothbrush?
Well, maybe there'll be an occasional toothbrush or a large dead fish coming into the Parliament. But in terms of how she will run things, I'm told it's about trying to be much more considered and maybe less about the initial headline and more about the long-term results.
And she won't be appearing on any platforms with the CFMEU like Max did.
Okay. All right, our panel, Anna Henderson, Paul Sakkal and Niki Savva, back in a moment with some Talking Pictures, with some final observations. It is time now, though, for Talking Pictures and Mark Humphries this week.
Well, hello there. I'm Mark Humphries, filling in for Mike Bowers, and I'm talking pictures this week with the mastermind behind the satirical website The Shovel, James Schloeffel. Welcome, James.
Hello, Mark. Lovely to be here.
Now, there was delight on the Hill for the True Believers, James, as the 48th Parliament was sworn in this week. Lovely Matt Golding in 9 papers. Today, the Governor-General will swear in my ministers, while Ed Husic swears at Richard Marles.
They've waited all of about 4 minutes to get into factional fighting, and do you know what? Like, no one cares.
That's it. There's a whole quarterly essay that you can read about it, but it's tough going.
It is.
It's tough going. Kathy Wilcox in 9 papers with Albanese. Cake, everyone. How nice.
Yes, and there's the knife there. Just looking at that closely, is that the knife that was used in the Rudd Gillard years? Or maybe that they borrowed that from the Liberal Party? It is hard to tell. There's a booking system, I think, for the knife. Hasn't been used for a little while though, but back in play.
That's it. Some photos from the swearing-in ceremony. Here we've got Malandiri McCarthy putting the party and Labor Party.
I think this is actually Anthony Albanese just showing off a little bit, just saying there are more women in my cabinet than there are in the entire Liberal Party membership. I like this one as well. I always find these kind of pictures a little bit awkward. It's like a really awkward family dinner, isn't it?
You've got Tanya Plibersek.
She's got that look that says, well, who knows?
Who knows
because
what it says?
She's so good at is giving nothing away.
That's right. Murray Watt there, who is now the Environment Minister. I don't think we're ever going to see Murray Watt as the Energy Minister, are we? Because it's just, you can see that, it's like having a Defence Minister called Gary Missile, isn't it?
It's not going to happen, no. Oh, and that's disappointing, isn't it,
sad?
for the tabloid newspapers out there?
That's it. Over to David Pope. After the landslide.
You'll need a shovel to dig out the nature protection laws and a mining approval from Western Australia.
It's a tough balance, that portfolio.
I do like these little elbow sandcastles here, and I think you'd like them too, because if his property purchases from last year are anything to go by, he does love a waterfront view. So,
well, it's hard to be the life of the party, especially when your party is the Liberals. We've got the Liberal and Nats bloodbath here by Johannes Leek in The Australian. Now is the time for reflection.
Renewal.
Healing.
This is like a soothing, regenerating bloodbath, which I actually think is quite an expensive and trendy new spa treatment in some of the inner city electorates that the Liberal parties
Forget ice baths, blood baths are in.
Yeah.
Mark Knighton in the Herald Sun. So you've got the shootout, you've got the Undertaker there, so presumably they're taking care of Peter Dutton. Now here we've got David Littleproud, who I presume has shot Matt Canavan. It's hard to know that because normally when you see a Nat lying on the ground, it's Barnaby Joyce. Sussan Ley is now the leader of the Liberal Party, and there's our friend Ted O'Brien.
Yes.
David MacArthur here with Sussan Ley smashing through the glass ceiling, presumably now having to face the glass cliff.
It's not looking great for Sussan Ley already, is it? Like, if we lived in Britain, I'm pretty sure a tabloid newspaper would have set up a time-lapse video on a lettuce by now.
Over to Matt Golding. Sussan Ley is the first woman to lead what's left of the Federal Liberal Party after the men completely trashed it. Yes, it does seem to feel the case of just all right. We've exhausted all the other options. We can let a lady have a go now.
Yeah. They've just done a runner, haven't they? And it is a total mess. I mean, some people would describe it as a nuclear bomb site, but then of course you remember that the Liberal Party's never going to be able to deliver nuclear, so that's a bad metaphor. But it is a mess over there.
And Brett Lethbridge with, well, this is just beautifully simple, the Liberal car that's gone off the cliff. Look after it.
I love this. What an absolute mess. One thing we can say though is that car is full of petrol, because if there's one thing that Peter Dutton did, he filled his car up with petrol about once every 6 or 7 minutes.
Nailed it. Well, James, thank you so much for joining me on Talking Pictures. I'll let you do the honours.
Thank you. Back to you, David.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Mark. Let's get some final observations. Anna.
This week at the National Press Club, a very prominent social media personality, Hannah Ferguson, gave an address, and she was talking about the importance of political endorsements by people on social media, influencers, etc., being really owned if they were paid for, and how that should be regulated. It's a really interesting space. I think there's a lot to watch in that area in terms of whether or not in future there'll be more regulation about influencers having to be very upfront about if they're being paid by politicians for endorsements.
Yeah, good point. Paul.
The Greens, without quite being explicit, have been suggesting that there was like a one nation Liberal Labor preference stitch-up to beat them in their seats, which is wrong. And on the right, shock jocks and some Conservative commentators have been saying that if we had a first past the post voting system, Liberals would have won the election, which ignores that many people would change the way they vote if we didn't have preferences. There's been a lot of nonsense spoken, and the people who call these points out are Kevin Bonham, Ben Rowie, William Bowe, Peter Brent, these unpaid psephologists who largely work on Twitter, now X, who are fantastic for public debate, and we'd really be poorer without them in our political discourse. So I just want to say thank you to all those guys.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Niki.
Well, counting is still proceeding in a few seats, including Calwell in Victoria, which Labor believes it can still hold. And if it does, that will be the first time since 1966 that an incumbent government has not lost a single seat in an election campaign. which would cement the status of Paul Erickson as campaign genius, I think.
And future MP, potentially.
Definitely not in Isaac's.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, so if you want to learn more about how and why Labor won and the Libs lost, Mr Erickson is at the National Press Club on Wednesday.
Lots of plugs for the Press Club, which is always great as well. And maybe he gets a question too on whether he's going to run for Parliament at some point. Thank you all very much for joining us. Jam-packed morning once again. Finally, look away now, Toto. The Prime Minister was looking very friendly with the Indonesian President's cat, Bobby, during his visit to Jakarta. There were even special gifts. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Making us all feel very excited about being here.